Hopefully you're here for the Expo Canuck canoeing trip informational session. I think you know me, but my name is Lainey. Use she, her pronouns. My love for the outdoors and camping really came from my experience as a participant at a summer camp in Michigan. At age 8 is when I started. Continued on to lead backcountry canoeing and backpacking trips for teens and adults. And then fast forward a few more years, came on to full-time staff as the program director at my home camp before transitioning to Manitowish last January. So a little over a year ago. And Kenzie, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Lainey. I'm Kenzie. I am the Outpost Director this 2022 season. I'm from Colorado originally, but have been around Manitowish since 2009, spending many years as a camper and participant, and then started my staff years in 2017 and have worked in quite a few capacities here in summer camp leadership, as a sectional, and last summer as an outpost leader. I was also fortunate enough to go on an Expo Canuck when I was a participant, so hoping to be able to answer any specific questions you have about the area and the place. And I am just very excited for this group to go out and get up north. Cool. So the fun stuff, the trip overview, where you're headed, what you're going to be doing, all those little nitty gritty details. So before you go out on the trip, you obviously come up to camp, the same thing you've experienced in the past, getting here, starting that community building process with the whole group, eating meals together, going through pack out, the full day dedicated to facilitation that is led by our leadership staff. Again, focused on that team building, trust, community building, really to solidify that before you're out on trail. So that's a really neat day, doing various activities on the low ropes course and high ropes course, and other just facilitation led by that leadership staff. And then the pack out, double checking the food, going over the menu, and then packing out all the gear, setting everything up, taking it down, doing it again just to make sure it all looks good. And the fun part about this trip is you get to set up your pack boats before the trip, because you bring boats that kind of pack down into a bag so you can put them on a float plane, which is really neat. And it's the only trip that we send out with these types of boats. So you'll spend a lot of time getting comfortable with those and what that setup process looks like, and then taking them down again. Only to bring them up north and do that whole thing right on over. And then that shakedown day where you get to hone in on all those technical skills, practice the safety stuff, rescues, paddling techniques, portaging these boats tends to be a lot more enjoyable for some folks because they are pretty light, but they can act as wind sails because of that lighter material when you're out there. So it's a fun thing to learn how to manage. And then arguably one of the more fun days of the pre-trip preparation for this is the river day. So you get to go out on a river near camp and get some time on actual whitewater, kind of learning the ins and outs of whitewater itself, practicing your paddling strokes, self-rescues, maybe swimming down the rapids just to get a feel of what that's like, and what a day on the water and the rivers will look like. So that's a really neat day and tends to be a favorite for a lot of folks before they head out on trail. It's one of my favorite days that I've experienced here pre-trips. And then just the last bit here worth mentioning is that reentry, something you've heard talked about in the past before, but coming back from a 40-day trip in the wilderness, it can be difficult. You probably experienced that last year. It's a lot of overstimulation, a lot going on when you come back, and that can be a challenge. So just a reminder to parents and to participants to be gentle with yourself and to be gentle with that reentry. Taking the time to have that intentional conversation when you return about what this looks like is really important. Cool. Did we skip over one? Yeah, no? Oh, no. I just skipped to reentry right at the end. Well, we're going to go right back up to travel to Canada. My brain is a little mushy today. My apologies. But after the pre-trip preparations in camp, you get to head up to Canada. Another very fun part of this trip, you hop on a 30-hour bus ride up to Saskatchewan with the advanced Canucks. You either go all the way up to Saskatchewan with them and stay there, or you are dropped off at a commercial airport along the way in Saskatoon, where you will fly into Yellowknife commercially and then fly into a float plane in the field. Or if going from Saskatchewan with the Canucks, you continue up to an airport called Points North, which is north of Mississippi, and you get float planed into the field from there. Both incredibly cool experiences, and that will just be dependent on kind of the route that the leaders are leaning towards, which they're working pretty diligently to plan right now. Daily life, you're on pretty big rivers and lakes throughout this trip. It's a really neat terrain that can vary throughout, and it's not like many of the other trips that we send. A similar aspect that you'll see to the Alaskan is that tundra squishy ground, walking on those tussocks. Fun thing to do with a boat on top of your head, another kind of challenge to learn in there. And a little bit different from some of our normal canoeing trips that we send. The weather, it's largely variable up there. It is the Arctic, so you never really know what you're going to get. Average, I would say it's in the 60s, but you can have 80-degree stagnant heat, like really hot days, down to 40 degrees cold and rainy out on the water. It does get pretty chilly at night regardless, so making sure you have the layers to be warm and bundled for that. And it can get pretty windy up in that barren tundra, which brings the temperature down quite drastically when you're out on the water, which is great for bugs, but temperature-wise and lake-wise, it can make paddling certainly a challenge and something to learn to work with while you're up there. Water, you're obviously on pretty big rivers and lakes. These are Arctic waterways, so they are pretty chilly. But they are just incredible. For this trip, you'll be spending time either on one main river paddling through 2 or multiple lakes along the way. They're huge, drastic lakes. Or you could be on a different watershed, the Elk Thalon, where you'd be on 2 kind of rivers throughout the trip, again, intertwining with lakes as you go. Maybe crossing a watershed, which is crossing from one of those rivers to the next by portaging your boats and all your gear. A lot of this water is going to look like those big lakes or rivers, which could just be that quick flowing water or that white water when you get into the rapids, which requires a lot more attention as you're going down, and sometimes getting out of the boats beforehand before you come up to a set to kind of scout out the set to see if it's something that you all feel confident that you can run and feels like a safe option, or if it's something that you either need to line the boats where you basically walk them down the side of the river or portage entirely around. So could be a lot of in and out throughout a day when you're on big portions of river with a lot of white water, or it could be just more swift water where you're cruising along. You could eat lunch on the river and go 10 miles without even dipping a paddle in the water, which is pretty neat up there. And again, you're paddling on these pack boats, which they're pretty incredible vessels, the things that those can do and the way that they float and hold you. One really neat thing about them is when you're on your knees in the river, you can kind of feel the water flubbing under you because they're not that hard bottom, which is a pretty wild experience, but it's cool to be so in tune with what you're doing out there. And then wildlife, similar to the Alaskan wildlife, you have that tundra up there. We are visitors in the wildlife's home, so we're very intentional about our travel and the policies surrounding the way we travel in areas like this. But welcome to the Arctic safari. You're going to see things, moose to muskox to wolves, foxes, Arctic swans. They exist. They are pretty incredible. Seagulls, fish, caribou. A lot of our groups have come across the caribou migration, which is just a sight to see while they're up there. Hundreds of caribou across the way. And yes, then bears. We are traveling in grizzly territory when we're up north in the tundra, so we take great care to prepare for the bear safety. Everyone will get their own bear spray carried on a bear belt, so you have it on your person at all time, and you will be trained at camp on what to do if there's ever an encounter, you see a bear before you get up here. And then those many precautionary procedures and how we set up camp, how we're storing our food each night, and so on. And then just talking to the bears pretty frequently, letting them know you're there, singing, yelling, "Hey bear," just being loud, just making it known that you're traveling through their home. And yeah, right back to that reentry, which I touched on before, just the gentle reminder. The fun stuff, the big questions, what to bring. A lot of what you'll have for past trips will work, but there are some specific items for this trip that are pretty necessary, and a little different than the other trips that we send out here. So one of those things right off the bat are going to be the wet boots that you wear for paddling. I think it's my all-time favorite piece of gear. I love these boots. They are incredible. It's essentially knee-high rubber insulated boots. Usually looks like rubber up to the ankle and then neoprene up to your knee, which helps retain a lot of heat, and keeps your legs warm during the day as you're in and out of the river and the water. These will be your wet shoes. So that's what you're wearing when you're paddling throughout the day. A very common and highly recommended brand is the Muck Arctic Sport boots, but other similar styles exist out there like Bogs. Those are a great alternative option. A lot of leaders and participants in the past do highly recommend that Muck boot. The neoprene is nice because it kind of hugs your calf, so water can't just constantly be pouring in and out. So kind of retaining that heat and that warmth in there. And something that I would recommend is a wool sock, then with a neoprene sock over that into the boot for warmth. That wool sock is the layer of warmth, the neoprene to help kind of with the water that does get into the boot, and then again into your boot. Seems kind of silly and redundant, but goes a long way, especially in the cold rivers up there. And then just hiking shoes for portaging around any sets that you need to, or if you're doing any watershed portages crossing from one place to another. Don't need to be the high-end hiking shoes, just enough ankle support that you can carry the packs on your back and the canoes on this squishy Arctic ground. Walking on that ground is a challenge. It's takes a little getting used to. And then Crocs are obviously a recommended thing that leaders and participants have brought on trips in the past. If they have holes in them, then bringing another pair of running shoes for cooking in the kitchen, because we don't allow Crocs with holes for cooking. But if you just want to bring those to air out your feet, to swim in the evening, great. And then just having those other pair of shoes that you can wear when you're cooking at night. And then bug shirts. You will come to love this piece of gear if it's a buggy year, and it can get pretty buggy up here. So what we have on our what to bring list is the original bug shirt. Great small company, been highly recommended. I love that piece of gear, but there are other options out there if you just kind of search around, but this is something that is highly recommended for this trip, as it does get pretty buggy by day up there. And then the wet clothes will kind of look similar to past trips when you're paddling, wearing a base layer set with either tripping pants or rain pants on the bottom. If it's warm enough, those quick dry shorts. And then on the top, that base layer again, like a long underwear top with a fleece layer in case it's cold while you're on the water. Some people also like a synthetic puffy on the water. Other people feel that the raincoat with the fleece is enough to keep them warm, which brings me down to that raincoat. A good quality raincoat, either Gore-Tex or multi-layer, that's going to fit over all your layers. That's the big thing that we hone in, because not only is that going to keep everything dry, but it's also a great insulating layer, keeps everything warm, and that goes hand in hand with your rain pants as well. And then at nights, obviously it does get cold up here. The sun doesn't entirely set. You might get a little more dusk, but it still gets chilly at night. We recommend that good rating sleeping bag, 0 to 15 degrees, something that's going to keep you warm. And something that can add to that warmth is a good sleeping bag liner. They not only increase the heat of your bag, but also increase the lifetime of your sleeping bag as well. And then that good quality sleeping pad that's going to keep you insulated from the ground, isn't going to deflate on you at night. That also, again, just helps with warmth and insulation there. And then just some past recommendations from leaders: toasty accessories, a wet hat and a dry hat, one that's going to be in your dry bag, so when you get to camp, you can put it on nice and fresh for the end of the day, and then one that you can have on the water, might get wet in the rain or while you're paddling. 2 buffs, fleece buffs or scarves or neck gaiters of sorts, again, wet and dry, are great to have. Fleece gloves, neoprene gloves for paddling if you want. If you don't have neoprene gloves and don't want to invest in those rubber kitchen gloves are also great because you can wear a warmer glove under it. They also keep everything warm and dry, or they can just be worn on their own. That's what I brought on my trip when I did it. And they're great accessories to keep your hands dry and a good budget-friendly option. Great. So the pre-camp preparation, the things that happen before you get to camp, before you start preparing with your community at camp. Now's the best time to start thinking about it. Thinking about the challenges that this trip is going to present you with, not only the physical, but the emotional, the mental, and the community challenges that you're going to face out there. So making sure you're in the right headspace, the right brain space, and the right body space before embarking on this trip. So while that physical is important, we also want to emphasize the emotional, mental, and community preparation aspects that you can be preparing for before you head up north. So emotional and mental can kind of go hand in hand here. The past few years have been tough for a lot of us, going in and out of these normals, new normals, and ever-changing daily lives, kind of adjusting to that. And going into the wilderness for an extended period of time can give you a lot of time to process these things. So thinking about how you're going to be challenged mentally, what new challenges you might face while you're out there, mentally and emotionally, and then trying to form those tools now to how you can address those and kind of go with that as you're out there, and think about some intentions you have going into the trip and what you want to get out of it. And then that communication as well, how you can communicate when you're feeling these things emotionally and mentally, which ties greatly into that community aspect. Building the community now, which is really unique at the Expo level, that you get to have that pre-trip conversations with your leaders and with the other participants on the trip as well. So build the shared community space. We really encourage you to lean into that so you can get comfortable communicating and advocating for yourself when you're out there on the trips. And then the physical, the often like sought after big thing here. A lot of people really tend to want to push themselves to physically prep for these trips. And with that, we just encourage you to be mindful of your physical limits and take care of yourself as though you're already on trail. Cautioning against pushing yourself too hard, because that's when we start to see those overuse injuries. And we just want you to be healthy going into this trip, as healthy as possible. So some good recommendations from people in the past are gentle endurance activities, biking, swimming, yoga, really great for the muscles to build up that strength and to also loosen you up while you're out there. Things to grow your endurance, but not push you too terribly hard while you're out there. If you also want to get into it, you can Google some fun paddling exercise, strengthening exercises on YouTube, as well as just the internet. There's some fun, funky activities out there to strengthen up those arms.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all that really good information, Kenzie. So I'm going to kind of move into some upcoming communications that I just want to make y'all aware of. So you probably got an email from Kenzie in the last couple of weeks talking about trying to get in contact with your participant. So if you haven't already responded to that email, make sure that you do with the preferred method of contact so that we can get that community building started with the group. Some other important dates are April 30th. That will be when final payments are due. So you'll be receiving information in the parent packet that will come out with that. And then June 19th, opening day, is when we will be welcoming you and being so excited to see your faces before you embark on your journey. And then August 13th will be closing day. Two other things that I wanted to draw your attention to are also our COVID town halls. We will be setting dates for those likely in April. So just keep an eye out for communication about that. Also, you should have received an email from Camp Docs with when you registered that has a lot of information about setting up your camper's profile, but also it talks about trip insurance. So I really want to stress the importance of getting trip insurance, and just that camp highly recommends it, especially at the expeditionary level. None of us like to think about the unforeseen of, getting ill or getting an injury while we're out there, or even before we even leave. Those evacuations or even just missing out on the experience can cause, a huge bummer mentally and emotionally, but also financially. That's a big commitment, especially if we're flying into the field and things like that. So just want you to think about getting trip insurance. If you have specific questions, I would direct those to Camp Docs. But yeah, once again, it just can be an extra layer of protection in case the unforeseen happens. All right, and just want to draw your attention also to some COVID stuff that has come out. This came out in our latest kind of COVID communications that you would have seen from us. So pre-camp things that we're hoping for and expecting are that you monitor for signs and symptoms. We also are requiring that participants are fully vaccinated, meaning either 1 dose of the J&J or 2 of Moderna or 2 of Pfizer. The little star there is to indicate that we are having exemptions for either sincere religious belief or biophysical reasons, meaning an allergy to a component in the vaccine. So if an exemption is something that you need to talk to us about, feel free to let me know, and I will give you the information for our operations director, Ben Hoffman, and he can help you through that process.
Hey, Lainey.
Yeah.
I don't think the J&J is indicated for 17 and below.
Oh, great point.
Yeah, so I wouldn't even mention the brand names because like Ben is 18 and he's always had Pfizer because he started when he was like 16.
Mhm.
But yeah, just don't mention any brand names because people get confused and then they want their 12-year-old to have J&J and that's no good. So
Gotcha. No,
yeah.
great. Thanks, Bitsy. Yeah, also just a note, we are requiring a proof of negative PCR test administered 72 hours prior to arrival. So those are things to think about with the pre-camp section. Opening day will look very similar to last year in terms of a drive-through drop-off. So those goodbyes will take place at the car and then you will kind of continue on your way. One exciting thing for this year is that we'll be returning our housing inside Smith Cabins. We had a lot of fun in Tent City last year on the Smith Village lawn. However, we are excited to have Outpost returning back inside the cabins this year. Masking will continue to be an important risk mitigation tool for us, and you'll see masking a lot when we're anytime we're interacting with members of the public and also on transportation. So when we're in the airport, when we're at a hostel, if we're in a grocery store, we are going to be masked during those times. At this point, we'll be testing folks if they're symptomatic, but I also want to give folks a little caveat about Canadian entry requirements. So the Canadian government, things are kind of changing very fluidly with what they're requiring. So it's hard to say what the exact requirements will be when the summertime actually hits and when we cross that border. However, at the present moment, Canada is requiring folks to have an antigen test 1 day prior to them crossing the border. So that is what it is at this exact moment. However, that could change. So with that, we'll continue to communicate about anything that is required on your end, if anything, with the Canadian entry. But I will say that at this point too, Canada is utilizing an app called Arrive Can that will be used to gather that documentation for the government. So, at this point, we're going to kind of put a hold on that and not really dig in too much, because as I said, things very much could change before the summertime hits. But yeah, once again, we'll be communicating with you about that. And then last point on paddle in and closing day. I know these are two big topics on people's minds. Paddle in and closing day are still very much up for discussion as to what those two dates look like. So I will continue to be in contact with you as decisions are made about those two specific dates. All right, that was a lot. So let me stop sharing my screen so we can see your faces. And Bitsy, I know you had a question about the route. Did Kenzie hit on what you're hoping for?
No. How many watersheds are you guys going for? Because
yeah,
that a lot. I mean, I think good watersheds. Those are good.
Yeah, right now the leaders are deciding between the Kazan River, which just follows one river from Anadai to Baker Lake, or the Elk Thalon, and they'd be dropped at Vermette, kind of paddling down the Elk River, transferring into the Thalon, and then ending in Baker Lake as well.
Oh, and will they be able to pack out their own food this summer?
That's a great question, Bitsy. I think it's something that we're still talking about internally.
Okay.
But we'll see where we're at with that. I don't have an exact answer right now. Great.
Yeah.
Well, any last thoughts, Bitsy, before we wrap it up?
Yeah, are you looking at the Wolf River for whitewater or going back to where I think we were 2 years ago last year?
we've gone to the Menominee, we'll never go.
Menominee.
Yes, thank you. And the Wolf, it will depend on water levels and what can give our leaders and our participants the most like varied experience. And we're also toggling with the idea of 2 river days right now as well.